basically when the label got wind of it, they shut it down and was like, we're not allowed to talk to nobody outside of Entertainment. So basically, Entertainment controlled us of being our lawyer, manager, role manager, whatever the case was, to not have other people get into, I guess, their business. Because I think things probably would have been much different if, one, I got signed with Management, then most likely I would have went and joined Def Jam Records, because Def Jam was making a lot of moves, man. Because at that time, you know, I found out from my brother Jalil from Houdini. He told me when they were out on these Fresh Fest and Def Jam tours, our song "Girls" was one of the top songs that was played on the tour buses, whether Run DMC was banging it out or LL Cool J, and you know, and those dudes was wondering why we weren't on these tours with them, man. So Entertainment kept us in the dark on a lot of stuff that was going on. Also, that our music was making noise overseas, and they prevented us from going overseas to do concerts and everything. So, yeah, they kept us in the blind on that, but everything comes to light, and then, you know, Entertainment history became short-lived anyway, you know.
You mentioned the Zulu Kings and you mentioned Ice-T. Is this where you met Ice-T, and what was that conversation like for him to ask you, hey, let's get down with the Rhyme Syndicate?
Right. So basically, I met Ice-T in 1985. Africa Islam was going over to LA for business, and he actually had an extra plane ticket. And he was like, yo, you want to go to LA? And I had never been to California, so I jumped on the plane. So at that time, we had just finished recording the song Girls. So I go to LA not telling nobody. Only my family knew I went to LA. So I get to LA, and I didn't realize that I was known there. People that already knew me from the early songs I did as the B-boys of the Rock the House, 2-3 Break, and Cutting Herbie. So once I got there, I met Ice-T. The first people I met was Ice-T and Darlene. So we hit it off right away. I had already knew Ice-T's history of being in the Breaking movie and some of the early recordings that he recorded, because Africa Islam was playing this stuff. So we hit it off cool, man, and we hung out, and I got to go around LA and see what California life was about, hang out at the Radiotron. And once I got there, I fell in love with it because it was a different atmosphere of what I was used to growing up in the Bronx. And I was like, man, California is a lot of space. You see the world, you see the sunshine, you see the ocean, you see palm trees. And the Bronx, to me, was blocking my vision of the world. The tall projects was not letting me see beyond the neighborhood. So, yeah, I was happy that I took that first trip to LA.
Was that transition easy for you, being a New Yorker, to go out to LA? Was that an easy transition?
Man, I was looking for something different to do, man, because at that time, my rap career was on stall. I mean, I had went in the studio and was doing various projects. I had worked with this alternative group called Was Not Was, which put out a lot of hit records. I recorded a song with them called White People Can't Dance. I had went in the studio with me and Bronx Style Bob, and we worked with the people of Bon Jovi, and we wrote a song called Are You Ready for Freddie?
Freezing
Mel
up?
Elm Street. Are you there? Okay, are you there?
Yeah. Okay, I think we're back in business.
Okay, so me and my boy Bronx Style Bar, we wrote this song called "Are You Ready for Freddie" for the movie Nightmare on Elm Street. Basically, the film loved the song, so this is 1986. They loved the song, but they wanted to use a bigger name to do the song. So basically, they brought in the Fat Boys. So when we thought, okay, the Fat Boys would go in the studio and do their own version of their song for the movie, but they heard the version that me and Bronx Style Bob did it, and they did it word for word how we did it, and basically
Ah,
made a video of the song we did. And at that time, I was fed up with the business. I was like, man, it's such a cutthroat business. And at that time, I was mad because I was like, man, the Fat Boys didn't even go in and write their own lyrics. They took our lyrics exactly how we did it, made a video with Freddy Krueger, and we was upset. We was basically angry at the world. So as 1987 rolled around, Africa Islam had moved to LA. And every now and then I would go check up on his apartment because he still had his apartment in the Bronx. So one day I was at his apartment and the phone rings, and it was Ice-T and Africa Islam calling. And they was basically calling to find out the situation about Scott LaRock. Because at that time, Scott LaRock had got shot and he died. So basically, when I told them the situation that Scott had died, and within that conversation, Ice-T told me about the plan to want to do this thing called Rhyme Syndicate, where we bridged the East Coast and West Coast, but not only with the MCs, but with the DJs, the graffiti, the music producers and dancers, Zulu Nation. So basically, that was the beginning of him putting that into my memory.
Right. You got down on his album Power. What was it that you learned going into the studio with Ice-T at this time and getting on such a classic album?
Okay, so but before Power came about, we had did the Rhyme Syndicate Coming Through album.
The project, okay.
Right, so basically, the album Rhyme Pays was supposed to have been a group thing. It was supposed to be the Zulu Kings, me, Melly Mel, Kaz, Bronx Style Bob, and Ice-T. But basically, a lot of us had still had issues with record labels. Mel with Sugar Hill Records, Kaz with Tough City, me with Entertainment. So basically, Ice-T was the only one free, and he got the deal and went in and recorded Rhyme Pays. So through that album, he got a budget to do the Rhyme Syndicate Coming Through album. So basically, he called me up. He was like, yo, D, I got the money. I can send you the money. You can go into the studio in New York, or I can fly you to LA and you can record your song in Hollywood. I was like, yo, ticket, give me the ticket. I'm coming to Cali. So I get out to Cali, but also I had another friend of mine who MC named Kid Jazz, and he was in a group called Domination. So Ice-T had liked how Kid Jazz rhymed, and I brought Kid Jazz out to LA, also DJ Chili D, and we went in, and Kid Jazz, they did their song, and me and Bronx Style Bob did the name of the game. So that was the beginning of all of us making songs under the umbrella of Rhyme Syndicate. You had the Spin Masters with Evil E and Hen G, Everlast, you had Low Profile, you had Nat the Cat. Also, you had a group called TDF, which had a member named MC Taste, who became the movie producer Tim Story. So we had a lot of different artists in that Rhyme Syndicate that, did a lot of things after the Rhyme Syndicate.
What did you learn from making that Rhyme Syndicate album with working with such a heavy cast of MCs?
I learned a lot, man, just being in the studio and seeing how everybody operated. There was no egos within in the crew, because basically it was new to a lot of them. And not a lot of them had experience of making records, basically. Probably just me and Ice and Bronx Style Bob. Within all those guys, a lot of them, it was their first time ever in studios making records. So it was a cool thing. They released a syndication song by Everlast as the first single, and the Bustin' Loose with the Spin Masters. So those were the first two videos that was released. And basically, after we did that album, I went back to New York, man, and just was wondering, man, what am I gonna do? And then Ice-T called me and was like, yo, man, because it was, in 87, I remember they had did the big concert at Madison Square Garden where they did a tribute for Scott LaRock. So it was basically the Def Jam tour with Public Enemy, LL Cool J, Eric B. and Rakim was on it, Houdini, and also Boogie Down Production. So I remember telling DJ Chili D, man, this is going to be the last concert that I'm not on a stage like that. I said, yo, we're too good not to be on stage performing like everybody else that was on that stage. So 1988 comes around and Ice-T calls me after we had already did the Rhyme Syndicate Coming Through album. He was like, yo, D, I got picked up to be on the Dope Jam tour. He was like, yo, you got to get out to LA. So basically, he broke it down. He was like, yo, it's going to be Eric B. and Rakim, Kool Moe D, Dougie Fresh, Boogie Down Production, and Biz Markie. I was like, yo, I'm out there. So once I got out there, you know, he was making the Power album. We go in the studio and I make the Syndicate song with him. So basically, you know, at that time, Ice was going through his situation with LL, and I kind of jumped in on that, just, you know, supporting my brother, man. And peace to my man, LL Cool J, man. I listened to that acapella verse he just put out, man.
Yeah,
Incredible, man.
absolutely.
Incredible. Yo, I don't cry about too many things, but that, what he dropped, brought tears to my eyes, man. So salute to my brother LL Cool J, man. So yeah,
Absolutely.
so that was the start, man. That was the start of me jumping on Ice-T's albums.
So were labels looking at you at this time? What made you go with Warner Brothers, Sire, at this time?
No, at that time I didn't have no record deal. So basically, I went out on tour with Ice performing that song, and also just on the strength of some of my past songs with the B-Boys. So for me, it was a big experience because now I got to see how hip hop left from when we was doing parties in abandoned buildings and in the parks to now we in Chicago Stadium, and backstage Michael Jordan and other Chicago Bulls, Scottie Pippen and all these guys are hanging out. We at the Joe Louis Arena, and people like Isaiah Thomas and John Sally and them Detroit Pistons are hanging out. So it was a different environment scene of now being on that big stage where I only seen groups like Michael Jackson and the Temptations and James Brown in that kind of a stadium, you know, environment. So man, it was an incredible feeling.
In '89, you had the pleasure of making your debut album. Can you take us back to what those sessions were like and what the experience was like of making Notorious?
Right. So basically, I got that album deal while we was on that Dope Jam tour. And from that, Ice was basically going over to Europe. And he told me, yo, D, you can go to Europe or you can stay in LA and record your album with Africa Islam. I was like, I'm gonna stay in LA. So basically, while we was on that tour, while on the tour bus, I was writing a lot of those songs, traveling around to different cities of that Notorious album. So once the deal was finalized, we went into the studio and recorded the album.
Were you pleased with the overall project?
Yeah, definitely, man, because I had some good producers. Africa Islam blessed it with some tracks, Johnny Rivers, and also DJ Chili D. So, you know, we was growing, we was learning. I mean, Ice had already sparked it off. You know, he had already built a big following. So basically, a lot of his fans had already knew about me from being from the Rhyme Syndicate Coming Through album, plus whatever stuff I contribute on his Power album. So basically, you know, I had built up a fan base off of some of his fans.
How did life change for Donald D after dropping your debut album?
Different, man. It became now. I was on that level as some of my peers that I grew up with in New York, and some of the artists that was hot at that moment. So basically, the first single of that album was FBI, and that song was basically written based on two people that was in my life, a friend of mine who I did musical with, and a girlfriend that I went with. So the first two verses about them. So it was based on a true story of them, and then I just kind of let it take, you know, the path with what else was going on in the world with people in sports hooked on crack and drugs, the rich people hooked on drugs, how the drug dealers was selling the drugs to the community. So basically that was the first single, and I always give salute and praise to, there was a radio station in LA called K-Day Radio. They was the first to set it off and put that song in rotation, and it kind of took on a life of his own from there.